2026 in Central Europe is certainly going to be interesting, and in this video I'm going to show you why you definitely should care, even if you're not specifically from the region. See, the four countries that once led to the post-communist democratization process are actually now Europe's most volatile political battlegrounds, and everything that happens could actually impact the whole of Europe and maybe even the world. Hungary faces its most competitive election in 16 years, Poland is building what amounts to a modern Iron Curtain, while its own government can actually barely function, Czechia has handed the keys back to a billionaire populist, and Slovakia, well, in Slovakia the Prime Minister, Robert Fico, has just visited Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, while the EU actually prepares to cut off his funding entirely. What happens in these four countries will determine NATO's eastern flank, the EU's institutional integrity, and quite possibly even the future of Ukraine. I'm Jan, this is ProgPulse, and today we're breaking down what to expect in the heart of Europe in 2026. Let's start with the big one, shall we? The Hungarian parliamentary election on April 12, 2026. See, for 16 long years, Viktor Orbán has run what the European Parliament now calls a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy. He's built a deep state of loyalists in every single corner of the judiciary, the media, and all the state institutions. But there's a glitch in Orbán's matrix, and the glitch's name is Peter Magyar, a 44-year-old former Fidesz insider, a former close ally of Orbán himself actually, who emerged dramatically after a pardon scandal that took down Hungary's own president. Magyar's Tisza Party captured 30% of the vote in the 2024 European election, which was the highest win for any non-Fidesz and non-Orbán party since 2006. Independent polling now shows that Tisza could lead with as many as 44 to 49% of the vote versus Fidesz at only 38 to 42%. Government-aligned pollsters predictably show Orbán still ahead, but because apparently when you install your people in the agencies who make the polls, you get the numbers that you need. Magyar's campaign is actually fascinating. See, while Orbán hosts lavish state events, Magyar tours the countryside on a flatbed truck, live streaming from broken down trains or crumbling hospitals to show how bad the country has become under Orbán. It's basically populism fighting against a different kind of populism with maybe better social media skills. We'll see. Here's the global stakes and the reason why you should care. See, if Magyar wins, it would actually mark the first ever successful end to authoritarian backsliding within the EU. And it would probably also be great news for Ukraine because, as we've already discussed on ProgPulse in the past, Orbán has been doing everything in his power to block all sorts of meaningful aid to the attacked country, probably due to his deadly bromance with the dictator in the Kremlin. If, on the other hand, Orbán survives, his model of the so-called illiberal democracy most likely gets renewed validation, and even in the region with people like Babiš in Czechia. See, the election isn't just about Hungary, as I've just shown. It's basically a referendum on whether entrenched populism can actually be defeated, even after more than 10 years, through the ballot box. And by the way, if you want to stay ahead of what's happening and what's about to happen in the region, I've put together a free one-page watch list that contains the 10 most important dates to watch out for in Central Europe this year. It doesn't cost you a single penny and is incredibly useful for not getting lost in everything that's about to happen. The link is in the description. Now, while Hungary is preparing to fight at the ballot box in April, Poland is quite literally digging in and preparing to fight on the battlefield. Warsaw has cemented its status as the premier #1 military power of continental Europe and is about to spend a staggering 4.8 to 5% of its GDP on defense, which is the highest in NATO, higher than even the US. See, Poland is currently building the so-called East Shield, which is a 2.5 billion euro military fortification along the borders of Poland with Russia and Belarus. It's basically a high-tech Iron Curtain that features things like anti-tank ditches, dragon's teeth, and an electronic anti-drone wall. They've even declared a war on beavers. Yeah, you heard me, the animals, because the animals keep compromising the hydrological defenses on the fortifications themselves. Poland also hosts 10,000 US troops, operates the primary logistics hub for more than 80% of all Western military aid to Ukraine, and has committed to reaching 5% of GDP on defense by 2035, which, as I've just said, they will likely have had basically reached by the end of this year, so much sooner than they themselves actually expected. Now, if you want to know where NATO's eastern frontier actually is, don't look further than Poland. But here is the pain point that makes this relevant for everyone, even outside the region. See, in June 2025, Karol Nawrocki, a conservative historian backed by the former ruling PIS party, narrowly defeated liberal Rafał Trzaskowski, we've also discussed it on Prague Pulse as well, by just 370,000 votes in the presidential election. And since taking office, Nawrocki has used his strong veto, which we've also discussed on Prague Pulse, to kill more legislation of the government of Donald Tusk in 5 months than his predecessor managed in a decade. Yes, he's vetoed more legislation than his predecessor in the entire time in office. And why does this matter for the global audience? Precisely because Poland's army is so incredibly formidable, and because it is the logistics hub for 80% of aid to Ukraine. And that means that it matters a lot how efficiently the country can actually function. If its domestic politics becomes so paralyzed that it cannot function, and judging by the amount of legislation that Nawrocki has vetoed already, it's questionable whether Poland actually can function. The entire security architecture of the eastern flank actually begins to crumble. And for the global audience, this demonstrates two important things. First, that European nations can actually dramatically exceed NATO's 2% threshold on military spending when they are motivated enough. And second, that even robust democracies can get paralyzed themselves through institutional gridlock, as we've seen in Poland lately. Czechia offers a different lesson. The lesson is what happens when a billionaire populist returns to power, but keeps the important stuff running for now. Andrej Babiš has formed what you might call a Czechia First coalition. We've discussed it in much more detail in a recent video, so do check it out when you're done with this one. Here's the important twist for now. Although Babiš is pushing the so-called Czechia First initiative, whatever that actually means, and although he is in a coalition with very questionable parties and chronic liars who've built their entire political careers on hating Ukraine and spreading disinformation, Babiš has actually also announced that the Czech ammunition initiative that's been supporting Ukraine so much will actually continue even under Babiš's government. And that initiative, launched under Babiš's predecessor, has actually delivered over 4 million artillery shells to Ukraine so far. Babiš stipulated that while no money from Czech citizens will flow in, foreign partners will be able to fund it and will be able to carry it forward. And that means that the program will survive and will continue helping Ukraine. Why does this matter globally? Well, it shows you that populist rhetoric and practical policy can actually diverge quite a lot. See, Babiš ran on EU skepticism and doing away with all sorts of help to Ukraine so that he would attract more domestic audience. But once in power, he has so far maintained a critical line of support to Ukraine through the ammunition initiative. See what happens in the future, but for now, at least a baseline support of Ukraine remains, even though he governs with anti-Ukraine parties. At the same time, this also means that due to the kind of parties that Babiš has decided to govern with, this also means that the ironclad hawkish consensus on Ukraine in the region is most likely dead. Babiš mainly cares about winning at home and getting as many votes at home as possible. And if that means in the future that he will have to throw Ukraine quite literally under the bus and join the likes of Orbán and Fico, he could gladly do it because it's the votes that he's after, not any grandiose foreign policy ideals. And finally, we have Slovakia, where the spirit of democracy isn't just struggling. Some observers and experts actually say that it's already long dead. Robert Fico, the prime minister, has actually just met Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago and pursued a 15 billion euro nuclear deal with Westinghouse. And that's actually a very strange image. He's seeking American business and American support on the one hand, while also maintaining a strictly pro-Russian and anti-American rhetoric at home. Just remember, a few years ago, Fico actually called the former Slovak president Zuzana Čaputová an American whore. Yes, Slovakia is still a country where being American or supportive of America can be a swear word. At the same time, Fico also goes to Mar-a-Lago and seeks business with the US. On the domestic front, Fico has spent the last months destroying the country's legal safety safeguards. For example, he abolished the special prosecutor's office that investigated high-level corruption cases and sometimes even targeted people closest to Fico himself and people from his own government, which is probably the reason he purged it. He also purged the anti-corruption police force in Slovakia, and that in itself has triggered the EU's conditionality mechanism and put Slovakia at the risk of losing billions of euros from EU funds, because Slovakia is now going against the fundamental EU values, and this is a protection mechanism to prevent it from happening fully, at least. Mass protests in Slovakia continue. More than 60,000 people recently protested in the capital of Bratislava, and the demonstrations actually spanned across 30 cities across the country. Meanwhile, the so-called average voter, whom Fico desperately needs to cling to power because he needs the votes of the average citizen, is feeling the squeeze the most because food prices have actually surged by 50% recently. And Fico's solution has been a mix of price controls, which famously work. Just look at communism and the famous lines for everything, ranging from toilet paper to basic vegetables, and a VAT hike on so-called luxury goods. Now, luxury goods, in Fico's understanding, include books, for example. For the global audience, Slovakia actually represents what democratic backsliding looks like in very real time within the EU's borders and how incredibly quickly it can actually progress. See, Fico won power at the end of 2023. Now it's the beginning of 2026, and already experts doubt whether Slovakia can be labeled a democracy any longer. So he's managed all of that in less than 3 years. And if Brussels cannot enforce its own values here, it raises serious questions about the union's ability to maintain democratic standards among its own members and whether or not it's actually able to hold the union together. So there you have it. In 2026, the heart of Europe is no longer a bloc. It's actually a fracture. Poland is the military shield, Czechia is the transactional dealer, Slovakia is the warning light that probably not even works anymore, and Hungary is the wild card where everything could happen in April. Whether these nations move toward democratic renewal or entrenched populism, and whether or not things get better or much worse, that will all determine the future of NATO cohesion and the survival of Ukraine, and maybe the survival of the EU as well. It's a lot to take in, but we'll definitely be watching every step of the way. If you found this useful, please, as always, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps me grow and push those videos to a wider audience. And if you want to support coverage of Central European politics, check out herohero.co/pracpulse. This has been Jan. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.